Welcome everybody to Coffee and a Mic. Today we're joined by Representative Andy Biggs for Congressional District 5. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks,
we
Chris.
appreciate it.
Yeah, good to be with you.
So tell us a little bit about what's happening in Washington. I heard it's been really quiet lately.
Nothing is going on whatsoever. So debt ceiling came out last week. I know we're going to talk more about that. The three must-pass bills that are, though there's really a fourth kind of a quasi must-pass going on that are on the docket over a period of time, and that'll include the Farm Bill, the National Defense Authorization Act, and then the budget process, which has to be, on the House side, needs to be completed probably mid-July to get to the Senate on time if we're going to follow the statute. Another one that needs to be redone is the FAA reauthorization, and we're trying to work in my office to try to make sure that we get some items that Williams Gateway has asked for in that reauth. We'll see how it plays out, but that one I would say would probably be the first one up on as far as legislation. The oversight and that Congress is doing is running about 900 miles an hour right now, and I happen to be on the two committees that deal with those oversight issues, oversight and judiciary. Another important bill that's flying under the radar that I hope that maybe you guys can be watching is the FISA reauthorization. So that is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. And the reason that is so important is that is one of the acts that we've seen where the Inspector General for Department of Justice has come in and said that the FBI has misused that particular act 2 years ago to access and spy on over 3 million Americans with no what we would call typically reasonable articulable suspicion or no probable cause. They just
picked somebody.
They just started spying, and then it got reduced to a little over 300,000, and they're like, well, see, we've fixed it. Well, unless you're one of the 300,000 that's getting spied on. So we're doing that. So you might be interested in that because everybody's getting surveilled these days, and so that's another bill that's going on. We continue to work with trying to get some water issues resolved in Congress, which is a slow grind. California didn't really want to participate in the latest Bureau of Reclamation agreement. I've been trying to get some of my California colleagues to join me in advancing legislation that would increase storage capacity in California. That's their big issues. They don't want to increase storage capacity. And if they were to increase storage capacity when they have a bumper crop like we had this year of water in California, that would help the entire western basin, and that would mean that Pinal County would be bringing it local, would be a beneficiary of California directly increasing their storage capacity. Anyway, all of that is going on and nested in a very busy Congress right now.
Yeah, no doubt. A couple of things that you just touched on I'd like to take a closer look at. So the Farm Act and water. So one of the issues that has been discussed is that Yuma in particular grows all of the salad greens for the nation basically in the wintertime. So if somebody in the north is eating a salad, it probably grew in Yuma. And if we have to ration the water there, how do we, number one, support the farmers and the Arizona economy, but then also where does that production shift? So is that being discussed at all?
It is, and that's why this latest deal was beneficial, because if an agreement hadn't been reached, then the Bureau was going to come in and actually set levels.
For the water use.
Set levels for water use. We have a problem with Pinal County because an historic water problem with Pinal County that needs to be remediated. If we can, so I'm just going to give you a whole set of scenarios that I've been discussing with colleagues. I've even discussed, there's been 4 studies done on how to move water from, say, the upper Midwest, Mississippi, Missouri River Basin out west. That's possible, it's doable, but the delegations on our side, when I say our side, the Republican side, have told me in no uncertain terms that they would not support any movement of water from those basins to the west. I have talked to some in the lower Mississippi River Basin who said they would be more than willing to move water over, but the studies have not ever been done for movement that way. By the way, I've talked to Texas members of the Texas delegation. They're willing to move it too, but the deal is they want to move it because they want to take a skim off the top before it gets further west. Okay, I mean, and I get that, and I'm more content if that's what we have to do to get water moving here. That's great. If we don't long-term take care of the water issue here, there will be some kind of rationing because we're the lowest priority on the Colorado River. I think we're ways away from that, but in the meantime, the idea is to try to. I mean, there's a discussion here in this state that we have multiple hundreds of millions of acre feet of brackish water that we should try to rehabilitate and extract. That would be helpful to us. We have to look at that very seriously and see the reality of that. I have not seen any studies on that to really confirm whether that's the case. I'm hearing that, but don't know. The other thing is, we were on track for a desal facility down in off the Sea of Cortez, but the Israeli company that was coming in to work on that, somehow there was a political or diplomatic faux pas or something that has scuttled that, at least for the time being. In other words, I don't think that's an immediate problem for tomorrow, but it is something that has to be dealt with long haul. And we're looking at all kinds of ways and trying to get a coalition of individuals to help out has been difficult. California's delegation, they're split. The Republicans in the delegation are willing to actually increase storage capacity and also move into things like desal, but the Coastal Commission is fighting on desal, and they're also fighting them on storage, and they have a 53-member delegation, and I think it's only like 6 or 7 Republicans, so getting those 6 or 7 Republicans doesn't really help me, but we're trying to work through that too, Chris.
Well, that's quite a lot, and we appreciate your efforts on that. You mentioned storage capacity a couple of times. We have an opportunity for storage capacity increases right here in Arizona on the Verde River. What's the opportunity there from the U.S. government?
Yeah, there is movement to how do I say this? Increase the capacity at Bartlett, right? So that's really the number one deal. And there's that, and then there's this movement to allow CAP and SRP canals to kind of intersect together as well, and those are on track, and I'm just not sure how soon we can get something like that done. I would hope maybe in this approach process, not as an earmark because I'm anti-earmarks, but working with our delegation and working with the appropriators, we might see something done to facilitate the Bartlett Dam. Now that's been approved in the past, or it's been notionally approved in the past, The other thing is, we have to deal with the NEPA permitting process to make sure that we facilitate that going forward. And the most recent permitting reformation did not, in my opinion, in reading it, did not facilitate what we need to have done to move that along more quickly.
So permitting reform has been a big issue. We have all of that money that got appropriated for the infrastructure improvement, but now we can't get through the permitting process. So we've been working with the U.S. Chamber to work on permitting reform, and it was actually part of it was included in the budget deal, but not quite far enough.
Yeah. So in the debt ceiling, the McCarthy-Biden debt ceiling, they put in a portion of what we call HR1, which was a permitting. It did not deal with the permit streamlining that we need, in my opinion, to really move this thing forward. The HR1, which also I didn't think it went far enough. That also it kind of got emasculated. So they just took a small portion of HR1 and put it in there as part of what I call the Christmas tree approach to legislating. So what happens is, we need your votes, so what do you need? You want HR1? We can't do all of HR1, but we can do these 2 paragraphs or whatever, you know. And so that's kind of what happened there. They kind of cherry picked, and the recipients committed to vote. You're not really supposed to have a quid pro quo, but so I won't say it was a quid pro quo, but there was something that a deal made where they did it, but it did not go far enough to really deal with it. What it really is going to facilitate is the streamlining of Green New Deal projects. That's the part of HR1 that's in there.
So the offshore wind farms or wind farms in general,
They'll get permitted more quickly than the roadways we need here in the valley.
Unfortunate. So we have we had 500 billion, I think the number was, for the infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
Bridges, interstates, things like that, and we can't get them permitted and can't get the shovels moving.
Yeah, that is okay. So a lot's going to depend on what goes on in this appropriations process, and I don't want to get in too much weeds, but there's a whole lot of push to try to rectify what just happened in the debt ceiling bill. We're told that they're going to try to fix a myriad of problems that they didn't fix in the debt ceiling and that they actually caused and exacerbated. I don't know if I believe that at this point. I don't want to be cynical, but I don't know if I believe it yet. You got to, when somebody abuses your trust, we all know that some people, we've all known somebody who's abused our trust. It's hard to rehabilitate and rebuild that trust, and that's really kind of what we're trying to do right now in Congress, is to see what we get. So I meet on a regular basis with senators to see what we can do to facilitate a myriad of different issue solutions, and same thing with members in the House. And so we're trying to see if we can get something done in the appropriations bill, but that's where you would look in the appropriations package. That's where you would look to see if we can fix some of these things that need to be fixed.
You mentioned the debt ceiling deal quite a bit, so let's take a look at that. So you were not in support. Were you worried about default? And did you feel that was a possibility?
No, I did not ever feel default was a possibility, and I'll tell you why. First of all, June is our second largest revenue month. And Janet Yellen gave us 7 previous X dates, right, where she said, we're going to default by this date. Again, none of those were accurate. Oddly enough, they all were in concert with a big Republican push for a piece of legislation or something. She said, oh, you better do this. Second thing is, she put out a number, $92 billion that she felt that they were going to fall short by June 15th. Of that 92, she was moving 36 billion of it into two various specific investment accounts that you didn't have to move the money to. So immediately take it down to $56 billion that you need ostensibly to get to June 15th, which is what she said. She didn't factor in that three of the biggest days of revenue are the first 3 days in June. So that wasn't factored in. That would have taken you down below 50. And I had introduced legislation that, if you really believed it was a problem, would have rescinded the IRS 87,000 agent, which was a $71 billion revenue increase, and also the COVID relief money, emergency money that's unspent, which is, they score at 29 billion, but the actual number is really probably closer to 50. If you really believed that you were going to hit an X date, and by the way, remember she says June 1st, and then when it looked like there was going to be this negotiated settlement, all of a sudden, oh, we found more money to take us to June 5th or 6th. That's my point, is that it was political in nature. And we could have solved that issue with my legislation. Others had legislation. And then I had also promoted, about 2.5 months ago, another plan that would obviate even needing to raise the debt ceiling. And now I'm lobbying for that to go toward the budget as well. But from June 15th, you will see that we're going to have a really large uptick in revenue. There's only 2 months of the year where you're in the black or close to being in the black. April is a bumper crop of money because that's when everybody's paying. And then for the second quarter taxes, which get paid in June, that takes us where we're almost exactly in the black every year. So I wasn't concerned about default. I was concerned about raising the national debt. Right now, you may not be aware of this, there is no cap on national debt, and there will not be a cap on national debt for 20 months. That was in the deal. The projection is that the national debt will grow by at least $4 trillion in the next 20 months. That will take you from 31.5 to 35.5. Most people estimating around $36 trillion in less than 2 years. And one of your questions, I know, is going to be about inflation. One of our problems economically is inflation, and I'll go into more depth on that. But I was very concerned that this deal was going to move to inflation. The second thing was there was no bend down on the curve, the spending curve. It was not even so the slopes like this. I think you need to bend the spending curve down so you quit deficit spending. We didn't even lower the slope. The same level of deficit spending on a monthly basis will continue. That is to say, we'll spend 500 billion plus a month, and our revenue will be 400 billion, something like that. I mean, the ratio depends on the month, but it averages to about $115 billion a month on a shortfall.
So part of the question is, there were spending cuts supposedly in the debt ceiling deal, but based on what you were just saying, it's really a cut in the growth of spending, not actual spending. Yeah,
I'm probably going to give you too much information, more information than you want, but I'm going to give it to you anyway. So in the week that we voted on that, Congressional Budget Office put out on Monday a letter saying that they were scoring it over a 10-year period a $2.1 trillion savings. That was their opinion, and they were deriving 1.5 trillion of something called a provision in there called administrative pay-go. Well, we didn't have the language on admin pay-go, and then when we got the language on admin pay-go, it said that any regulatory agency that was going to have pass a rule that would have impact the economy more than $100 million would have to provide a stream of payment, of revenue in order to pay for that. But the director of the Office of Management and Budget, who is a Biden administrator, and I'm going to say this: she's a hard left lawyer, and even my colleagues on the other side, they agreed. Yeah, Andy, we're not worried about admin pay-go because you guys provided a provision in there that said she could basically, for any reason, waive the pay-go. And then there was no judicial, opportunity for judicial review of that. So if she said, you don't have to pay it, that was it. And so by the day that this was going to pass, they changed it from $2.1 trillion in savings over 10 years to $1.3 trillion in savings, and they reduced that. They completely took the admin pay-go out of there because there isn't anybody in Congress that thought we were going to save a nickel over that period of time. In fact, the leadership quit talking about admin pay-go, which is what they told us over the weekend. It was transformative. So how do you get to the balance now, this $1.3 trillion where they claim over 10 years? What they did is, you said it best, they put in place just below the 2023, this is really too much in the weeds. So anyway, let's just put it this, I'm just realizing that, I'm really going off on this thing, but they put in a spending cap for 2 years that had a small growth of 1% per fiscal year, those 2 years. Then they put in targets for the next 4 years. Well, most of that 1.3 trillion is if you assume that those targets are actually hit. I haven't been in Congress real long, but I've been in there long enough to know we're not going to hit any of those targets. We don't hit any of those targets because we continue to deficit spend. And so the real number we guess is probably over that 10-year period, if you give them the long term the benefit of the doubt, really gets down below $100 billion. And the current fiscal year, and I won't get into this because this gets you, drive you crazy in the weeds too, the number is really about $9 billion in savings this fiscal year. And in the meantime, you're raising your national debt by $4 trillion, at least.
No, that's good, because you set the stage for, number one, it's super complicated. But number two, we haven't gone through a normal budget process for the last couple of decades.
Right.
Which
right.
then means, was that the norm? And then we have younger members of Congress who, on the left, who believe perhaps national debt doesn't matter, or deficits don't matter. And that was actually 2 years ago, perhaps, that Ms. Ocasio-Cortez said, it doesn't even matter. We can just spend.
So the second part of your question I'll take first, and that's this notion of modern monetary theory. The notion of modern monetary theory says if you're a government, because you have mandatory revenue authorization, in other words, you can tax people, bring it in, and you have the ability to just actually pump money into the economy, it doesn't affect, that's a good word, it doesn't affect inflation, and it doesn't, deficit spending does not affect the economy. And so you can just print as much money as you want, incur as much debt as you want, which, we still haven't gotten to inflation, but if we get to inflation, that is what's driving our inflation today is federal spending. But I'll leave that for a second. And your first question, which was, the budget process. We have a statutory obligation to go through a 12 appropriations bill process. So every year you're supposed to, both bodies are supposed to take up 12 bills for 12 different sections. So you might have one on military spending, you might have one on judiciary and homeland security, another one on agricultural spending, whatever it is. There's 12 areas. we are supposed to, as you say, pass those bills out of the House first, that's a constitutional requirement, send them to the Senate, they doctor them, do whatever they're gonna do, and then they send them back when we have a conference committee and we're supposed to pass them out. And then get them by September 30th, because that's the close of the fiscal year, to the president for signature or veto. I've never seen it. I've never seen it. It hasn't been done in 20 years. The last time you actually had a process that really was successful, I think in 2002, 2003, they did that process successfully. And the last time you actually had a balanced budget was 1994. So what they typically do, when I say they, that's because every member of Congress, when they're back home, they say, I'm not really part of that body, this is what they do. And what will happen is the appropriators and the leadership, they're gonna get together, the four of them are gonna get together, and they're gonna put together a package. And it's probably not gonna be the 12 bills. They're gonna do something that we call a continuing resolution. And that is to continue spending at a current level going forward. And that was actually in the debt ceiling bill, but the problem with it is they put the impact of the CR at a 1% reduction in there not till January 1st. So what we typically see is this short-term, what we call a short-term CR, continuing resolution to spend at current levels. And then you build, then they'll go in, leadership will build an omnibus spending package without the input even of the budget committee or the appropriations committee. And then they will come back and say, this is what you're gonna have to spend. And that usually happens in December, when everybody, except for me, is anxious to get home for Christmas. I mean, just like a rainbow follows rain, you're gonna have the Friday before Christmas, you're going to have this massive spending bill come out, and people are gonna vote for it because they wanna get home for that break. And that's what I think is gonna happen here, which is why I think they moved the CR stopgap until January 1st. Is that too cynical for everybody on early Friday morning? I'm sorry, I'm just laying it out, I'm just telling you the way I see it, so.
I'd like to say, no, I'm an economist from before, and so I'd love to talk about that in depth much more and how do we unwind this problem. But we got to move ahead in the sake of time. I know you have other places to be, but I wanted to switch gears and talk a little bit about the southern border. We have humanitarian crisis, we have a fentanyl crisis, we have every kind of crisis going on. And we don't seem to have a whole lot of action now. Immigration reform actually purview of the Congress. So is there any talk? Is there any unity there? Is there any way for us to be able to make a fast, expedient process for people who legitimately want to come and work, be able to come and work and pay taxes, and keep out gang members and drug dealers and everybody else? So
if you're asking if there's a comprehensive immigration reform package in the works, no. I will tell you that Yuma is the prototype of how a temporary worker program should work. I mean, we particularly during harvest and planting, there'll be anywhere from 7,000 to 12,000 people who legally come across daily. They go in, they work. Many of them stay per the authorities they're allowed, but most of them return south of the border. What's going to go on, part of the problem now is that the border is so wide open. You're going to hear my colleagues across the aisle will always say, but Andy, we're down 70% in between ports of entry, border crossings and apprehensions and encounters. And I say that's true, but it's still about 4,000 to 6,000 a day. When Jay Johnson was Obama's Homeland Security Secretary, he said if we have more than 1,000 a day, it is a national crisis. We sit at 4,000 to 6,000 a day, our Border Patrol remains overwhelmed. Most of the rest of them are now being funneled through the port of entry through the CBP app 1 that Secretary Mayorkas has put into place. And they don't get counted in that same number that a month ago we would have said there's 10 or 12,000 a day coming across. Those people coming in that are going to the ports of entry are not, they're recategorized now, effectively. And so I raised that because with the number of people that are coming across, there are some, I mean, you have every kind. You have people that are gang members and terrorists and drug dealers and human traffickers and human smugglers, and you have people who want to work or looking for a better life. Whatever. You have this massive mix that we virtually cannot tell who's what, because the vetting process works like this way. So if you were going to come in and be part of the UMA program, we could vet you because you're filling out documents. We can call, we can check those documents and run them. With the sheer number of people that are coming across, we cannot. What they're running now is under this administration. They're running basically a blank sheet, and they're saying, "What's your name, your date of birth, where are you from?" And we have no way to vet them. So for instance, if they're coming from, let's say Venezuela, they're granting 30,000 people a month parole from Venezuela, Nicaragua, Haiti, and Cuba. If you are coming across and you say you're from Venezuela, we don't even look to see who you are, because Venezuela will not share any information about who you are with us. And we can't, they won't take you back. We can't send you back. If we know, if you're on the terrorist watch, if we have some kind of biometrics and you prove to be, well, then Venezuela still won't take you back, right? So this is part of the problem, saying let's get these people in fast so they can work where we need ag workers or whatever else we need workers in. How do we vet them? We can't even vet. We have 160 different nations coming across, and right now, okay, I'm going to get this mixed up. Yuma, Tucson, or El Paso, one of the biggest groups is coming from Africa, from African nations who have absolutely no databases we can even check. And even with South American countries, they don't share database information with us. So unless they're Interpol or on an international terrorist watch list or have committed a crime in the U.S., we really don't know who they are coming in. And that, to me, is a national security threat. That's why I say, before we can do anything further on the other issues you're talking about, you probably need to bring that border under control. And to give you an idea what I'm talking about, we haven't had a statutory definitional control of the border perhaps ever, but the closest we had it was in 2020. Give you an example, Yuma sector, the whole sector, 123 miles long, we had only 8,600 encounters for the entire year, 8,600. That allowed us to, everybody, we could vet you, we could see, who are you, what are you doing? They're like over 350,000 already this fiscal year. So there's just like, we have no idea who you are. 100, I think they're at 140 countries through Yuma. Sorry.
Another
Welcome to my world.
Right? But it all begins with a first step of some kind.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, is there any coalescing around an idea?
So we actually passed out a pretty good bill. Wasn't great, but it was probably one of the best bills for border security. It's now sitting in the Senate, and we don't think they're going to take it up. Some of us were suggesting that you include in the debt ceiling. I mean, you have to do something on the border, include this in the debt ceiling. We've asked them to include in the NDAA, the farm bill, because it's related to farming and ag. Included in the budget bills. And the reason you do that, lift up the rock again on legislating, is you got to have a leverage point. Those are considered must-pass bills. And so you've tried to get something meaningful like an H.R. 2, which was the border security bill, in those must-pass bills. Why is that? Because people who otherwise recognize we're gonna have to pass this piece of legislation. They might swallow and give us the HR2, which included everything from asylum reform, Flores settlement reform, giving us better access to try to vet these individuals. It reinstituted the Remain in Mexico policy. I mean, a whole series of things that we're actually working to reduce traffic on the border. Just to give you one other thing on the border, the inputs are still there. Darien Gap, which is in Panama, which is about a 6-week lead time, is up to over 500% on a daily basis. And this is people from all over the world that come into the Darien Gap, very dangerous place. And they come and they end up through which is in Panama. They finish through Panama, Costa Rica, Honduras. Nicaragua doesn't do anything to help us, and then they end up coming up through Mexico. So it's a huge humanitarian issue that's also a national security crisis.
Well, so much more to get to, but we are running out of time. I did want to talk just a minute about inflation, and without going too far, right now we're trying to control it with monetary policy, but the factors that created the inflation aren't easily controlled in that way. Wrong tool for the problem.
I agree with you, Chris, 100%.
So, has anything come up as perhaps the right tool, and perhaps it involves also tax code of some kind, or repatriating our supply chain and fixing those disruptions?
Oh man, you thought the budgeting stuff was complex. This is really complex. But okay, so what really fuels our inflation right now? You have actual traditional inflationary pressures, which is the devaluation of your currency, which is a result specifically of all COVID spending from, and both parties were responsible for it. And that was about $7 trillion of non-productive money placed into the economy over about a 26-month period. What that did is that money is out there floating around. In fact, the estimate is that year $1 to $2 trillion of absolute total waste. We have no idea where that money is or where it went. And which some of us who voted no on that stuff said you're probably just going to fuel inflation, and you don't have any safeguards to know where it's going. Anyway, so that fuels inflation, Chris. That's why monetary policy is not going to fix it. That's why we get back to why I think it's so important to bend down the spending curves to stop deficit spending. Because if you could start bending down the curve and hold the national debt kind of in a stasis mode for a while, you might have the ability to stabilize and then in the meantime claw back and rescind some of that money that's floating around out there. That would actually, I think, provide a foundational tool to stabilize federal spending, because it allow our economy to grow up into those levels. But as long as you remain high at the post-COVID relief package levels of spending, which is what was enshrined in the debt ceiling bill and what I'm afraid is going to be enshrined in this upcoming budget, you will continue to have inflation. So how do you deal with it? You do what I'm suggesting. You reduce your spending, you prioritize it. You also reduce the size and scope of the federal government. Right now you got the fourth branch of government, which is causing an enormous amount of problems, which is also part and parcel of why we can't repatriate enough manufacturing and other jobs that we need to. So you need a tax code. We need to make permanent some of those tax reforms we made in 2018. We just had a meeting with the Ways and Means Chair. His package largely does that. I don't think it extends. A couple of them he's just extending for a year, and I'm like, those should be permanent. If those are permanent, and we're talking things like immediate depreciation, those
things that help the large industrial base.
Exactly. That repatriated a lot of jobs, and it would bring back more, and that would stay. And that kind of job growth would actually, I think, help stabilize and like I say, grow into these baselines which are being codified because I can't see my colleagues being willing to go down to the lower baseline, which we can actually afford. So in spending, when I say baseline, I mean baseline spending. So that's just a rudimentary attack on it.
No, we appreciate that. Again, and we appreciate your time, so perhaps a good time for questions from the audience with the time that we have left. Joe?
Yeah, first of all, I appreciate your time. It's refreshing to have you here and talking about, these are really big, complex issues. And, you know, for every problem we're solving, there's solutions, and it takes creative solutions to, you know, come up with this stuff. It's easy to complain and point fingers and all that, but to take, you know, personal responsibility. And just in this format, it's refreshing, you know, and
Thank you.
I would love if you could do this more often.
I'd love to do it.
I'd
Love to do more
love to
often.
have like citizen input with this stuff, because, you know, as an outside observer, seeing what's going on and the dysfunction of Washington D.C., you know, there's so many reforms that should be made. You know, fundamental campaign finance reform, fundamental tax reform is huge. You know, but in with these big issues, you know, I always think of, you know, I have kids, you know, and it's like, what kind of future are we going to believe in here? So, you know, and that's my litmus test for sustainability with anything, you know, and just with what we're dealing with, you know, and because of the dysfunction, it's not sustainable. So, you know, what the changes are, you know, and I think it comes down to us as individuals and in the community, you know, coming together and, you know, solving real big problems, you know, but being able to, you know, have a representative, you know, a voice, you know, in Washington D.C., because, you know, like the number of lobbyists that every single congressman has is atrocious, and we should all be appalled by that, you know, but that's the way the system is played. It's a game to a lot of these guys, you know, where, you know, the best interest of we the people is not being addressed. So, you know, I could talk to you about all these issues in depth, you know, and are you available to, you know,
I think,
talk about big issues?
Right, the Representative Biggs has done a great job of being out and about in the community, and you just started or perhaps I just started receiving it, I don't know, but a great newsletter talking about it, the Biggs idea.
Yeah, so I appreciate that, and we do want community input. So I do a town hall, a teletown hall every month, which we reach. They told me our contractor who puts it together, we had over 7,000 people on the line last month, and that's pretty high to get that kind of response. And we get on the push through. I think we get a lot. We only have time. You know, you only have time for 10 to 20 calls every month.
Sure.
And when I'm back here, I'm literally going from place to place and meeting with different groups, and like here,
Sure.
You know, it just depends on when we're there. I want the input. I like to hear the input, and I also like to explain stuff. I mean, you know, because a lot of time, and then I do videos. So I would say, yeah, grab the newsletter. I do a podcast every week. I'm going to do another podcast today talking about the debt ceiling and a little bit of that. Probably talking about the budget coming up. And I bring in guests every week to talk about different issues, whether it's and trying to we get feedback all the time. So I would say, don't be a stranger at sending us emails. We crank out anywhere from 1,000 to 2,500 letters a week to constituents, and on various issues, and trying to respond.
Yeah,
but you said
I like the personal conversation. So,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
So it's not just, you know, information coming
Sure.
out. It's me sharing my ideas on immigration or water conservation or
Right.
you know, economy, immigration, any of these stuff. You know, because there's you know, what's solution oriented? How do you solve a problem, and then how do you take that back to Washington and get the bipartisan consensus, like, I mean, because we all have a vested interest in these big issues and resolving them.
Right. I just want to say one other thing, because I think you said it the first time you were talking. I think you touched on something which to me is the ultimate solution to this. Most of these big problems are going to be resolved at the state and community level.
Mm-hmm.
And by the federal government standing down and getting a little bit smaller and recognizing that, like in Arizona, why is the EPA, which by the way, just as a little side note, we haven't authorized in 30 years, even though we keep giving a bunch of money, we haven't authorized them. Why is the EPA, you've got people in a cubicle in Washington, D.C., why is the EPA setting water policy for Arizona? Why is OSHA setting our occupational safety standards? When in Arizona, sometimes our standards have been better and more rigorous than the feds, but the feds have come in and required us to revert to the federal levels, even though our standards were more rigorous, onerous, and more safe. I mean, this is what I'm saying is ultimately.
There's no continuity between federal and.
I think we get to, each higher level of government knows better than the one below it.
And I'm willing to say we need to go back to the state and local level.
Right, and speaking of which, we have a question over here.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Biggs, for your time this morning. Congress, it's dysfunction, it's gridlock, but here we are in Queen Creek, it's Friday, we have 6 days ahead of us, we're still at double-digit temperatures, so I'd like to lighten it up a little bit and give you a chance to talk. Your office recently helped me with a constituent issue. A constituent of mine was having difficulty getting VA veterans benefits. Queen Creek Chamber has a bunch of veteran business owners, and certainly Queen Creek has a large percentage of veterans who own businesses here. Please give us just a brief insight into what your office is doing to value our veterans, sir.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Jeff. So we have two people who work on nothing but veterans issues. Lee Huff and Thayer Verschoor. That's their job. And so when veterans have trouble getting the benefits that they deserve and have earned, I mean, it's everything from medals that have been lost, they're trying to get to actually maybe some difficulty getting treatments that they deserve, or status that they feel like they should have. They should call my office with these guys. Lee and Thayer they do a great job and get that out there. We also do some additional stuff, like once a year, you were at it, I think, we do a drop zone event where we bring in, this year we had more than 60 vendors and service providers who want to serve the veterans community. They come in. We invited literally probably 150,000 people to come. We've got hardly anywhere near that, but we had a nice turnout, and they come and they were able to get these services done. So that's on the veteran side, and that's really an important thing for us. We view that as a primary issue. But I would just say we also have some great people doing other issues with any kind of federal agency if there's a question. So we were talking about this. My staff is, in the last year or year and a half, I think it's over $5 million they've been able to secure through IRS refunds that have been withheld for one reason or another. That's pretty awesome. It's the highest I know of any congressional office. Then we also have passports. I'm bringing this because this is probably our busiest thing right now, is because everybody's leaving and they didn't bother to get their passport, and so now they're calling up and, oh, I'm supposed to leave in 2 days, and I just realized my passport's expired. And as you can imagine, the passport office, the Western office, is just inundated. So we can get them. We work hard, and we are just shy of 100%. The only one I know we haven't been able to facilitate getting that passport was an individual. And I don't know if they're really calling from the airport, but it was that close. It was that close. But everybody else we've been able to help. So thank you for bringing that, because it gets back to the point of community and really local, trying to get this thing going on a local level, make sure everybody's understands that we're working here too.
Thank you, sir. Those efforts are appreciated.
Thanks, Jim.
And we appreciate your time, Congressman.
Thank you.
Hopefully you'll be back soon. We have so many more. We got through about half the list of questions, but we appreciate it.
I feel like I was so long, I mean,
You did great.
if I was in the audience, I would want to know all the details.
Right?
You know?
And I think it's important that people know. I always liken it to the Facebook as you scroll and say, if they would just do X, fill in your favorite, it means you don't have all of the facts. So, because there's a lot of people working on a lot of issues, and it's never as simple as if you would just do whatever. So, but thank you so much for your time. We
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Chris. Thank you.